Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello everybody. Now it is quite clear that 4th of October is the date for the Civil Service Prelims examination. We at Rouse IAS believe that you are well prepared to give your best and clear the prelims examination with ease. Now the first pre-prediction test has already been conducted on 20th of September 2020 and I hope that most of you must have appeared for the full-length test. Those of you who are not appeared for the test, please register yourself at elearn.rouseis.com and appear for the test which is scheduled on 25th of September 2020. Appearing for the test will help you in the last minute revision. It will help you boost your confidence before the actual examination scheduled on 4th of October 2020. The registration link is in the description box below. Register yourself and be ready to test yourself for the same parameters on which UPSC is going to test you. All the best for your examination. Today we shall be discussing the Hindu newspaper dated 22nd of September 2020 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now the first article appears on page number 7 and is titled as Dilution Without Adequate Deliberation. This particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the introduction of the 3 labor codes in the parliament by the union government recently. This article shall be important both from the perspective of GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 3. Before going to the analysis of this particular article, I would suggest you to take this particular test and try to find out the answers. Further, see the introduction of the 3 labor codes has been appearing in the newspaper repeatedly since last 4 to 5 days. Moreover, the theme of labor reforms is quite important from the perspective of the UPSC examination. Accordingly, in UPSC mains, questions can be asked in multiple dimensions related to the labor reforms. For example, one can get a general question as to how the labor laws have constrained the growth of the manufacturing sector and employment creation. Question can be asked with respect to the provisions of Code on Wages Act 2019 that was passed by the Parliament last year. Then one can expect a question about the recent controversies related to the introduction and dilution of the 3 labor codes introduced by the union government. Considering the importance of this particular theme of labor reforms, we shall be discussing in much greater detail all the aspects related to this particular topic. See, countries across the world have used different modes of escape to escape from underdevelopment and pursue the path of economic growth and development. Broadly, the countries have used 3 modes of escape, that is geography, geology and genes. Geography basically means countries have made optimum utilization of their unique location in order to promote growth and development. Now, for example, countries such as Switzerland have focused upon tourism because of their unique location in order to promote growth and development. Similarly, countries such as Saudi Arabia, Australia, Canada, etc. have optimally harnessed their natural resources or their geology in order to pursue the path of development. On the other hand, countries such as Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, and in recent times China has focused on low-cost manufacturing, which is also referred to as genes, as a mode of escape. Now just imagine, out of these 3 modes of escape, what should have been a mode of escape for India? Since India has the world's second highest population and since it is abundant in human resources, India should have ideally focused upon genes as a mode of escape from the underdevelopment. So ideally, India should have focused upon the low-cost manufacturing just as a way China has optimally utilized its population to promote growth and development. However, so far India has not played according to its strengths, which can be seen from the fact that it is a services sector that contributes the highest to our GDP, whereas the manufacturing sector even today is not well developed. So India's failure to capitalize on genes, that is a low-cost manufacturing, has led to 3 peculiarities of Indian manufacturing. First and foremost, the share of manufacturing sector to India's GDP has remained stagnant at 17%. since the 1991 LPG reforms. Secondly, the manufacturing sector has come to be dominated by the small size firms rather than the large size firms. And ironically, instead of focusing upon the labor intensive industries, Indian economy has focused upon the capital intensive industries. See, one of the main reasons as to why India has failed to capitalize on the low cost manufacturing is being attributed to the complexity in the labor laws. Hence, in order to address this particular problem, last year the government had introduced 4 labor codes in order to amalgamate and consolidate all the labor laws in India. These 4 labor codes were Code on Wages, Industrial Relations Code, Code on Social Security, Occupational Health, Safety and Working Conditions Code. Out of these 4 labor codes, the Code on Wages has already been passed in the year 2019. As far as the remaining 3 codes are concerned, recently on September 9th, the government has decided to replace these 3 codes which are introduced earlier in the parliament with the new codes. Actually, when these 3 codes were introduced in the parliament last year, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Labour had given a number of recommendations in order to improve the effectiveness of these 3 labor codes. However, the newly introduced labor codes by the government on September 19 has failed to incorporate the suggestions or the recommendations given by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Labour. In this regard, the article that we are going to discuss here raises a number of concerns with respect to the newly introduced labor codes and also highlights as to what extent the newly introduced labor codes are different from the earlier codes that were introduced in the year 2019. Accordingly, keeping in mind the demand for the prelims and the mains examination, the various dimensions that we would be covering in this particular article include the problems and challenges with respect to labor laws in India, the problems with the Minimum Wages Act 1948, which eventually led to the introduction and the passage of the Code on Wages 2019, then about the Industrial Relations Code Bill, the Code on Social Security, and the Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions. Now, coming to the first dimension as to how the labor laws in India have acted as a hindrance in boosting the manufacturing sector and creating the employment opportunities. See, first and foremost, the labor as a subject has been placed under the concurrent list. Hence, it empowers both the parliament as well as the state legislature to make laws related to the labor welfare. So presently there are more than 40 central laws and more than 100 state laws dealing with the labor welfare. Some of these laws are the Industrial Disputes Act 1947, the Trade Unions Act 1926, the Factories Act 1948 and so on. So this particular multiplicity of the labor laws in turn increases the compliance burden of the industries. It also exposes them to a risk of corruption as well as harassment by the government officials. Secondly, even though we have more than 140 laws which are made by both the center and state dealing with the labor welfare, these laws as such are applicable only to 10% of the workers in India who are categorized as the formal workers. If you look at the informal workers, these informal workers are highly vulnerable. These informal workers do not have job security. They do not have social security. In spite of this, the labor laws in India fail to cover or provide benefits to the informal workers. Thirdly, the manufacturing sector in case of India has come to be characterized by a problem known as the problem of the missing middle. Now this essentially means that in case of manufacturing sector, we have a large number of small size enterprises and less number of large scale enterprises. So there is a near absence of the medium sized enterprises in the manufacturing sector. This means that when the small size enterprises began their operations, they were infants to begin with. Now these infant industries should have grown into giants. But sadly, in case of India, these infants have continued to remain smaller rather than grow bigger. So there is a near absence of medium-sized industries. In fact, the Economic Survey 2018-19 had characterized such firms as the draft firms, wherein these firms, in spite of the fact that they are more than 10 years old, rather than grow into giants, these firms as such continue to remain smaller and they continue to employ less than 100 people. So this clearly shows that these firms are unable to grow bigger or to create more amount of employment opportunities. Now, one reason for this problem of missing middle is attributed to the labor laws. See, the labor laws as such are not applicable to small scale industries, and they become applicable to the medium and the large scale industries. So, if a small scale industry transitions into a medium or a large scale industry, then automatically it would come under the purview of the labor law. This increases their compliance burden. Hence, in order to avoid the compliance burden of the labor laws, these industries as such continue to remain smaller rather than grow bigger. Now, one of the best example of such a labor law happens to be the Industrial Disputes Act 1947. See, this particular act as such is applicable to all the industries that employ 100 or more workers. Under this particular act, if any industry wants to fire or remove any of its workers, then such an industry is required to take the prior approval from the government of India. So the Industrial Disputes Act as such does not provide the necessary flexibility to the industries to manage their human resources or their employees efficiently. So what the small scale industries typically do is they continue to employ less than 100 workers, because if they hire more than 100 workers, they would come under the purview of the Industrial Disputes Act. This would increase their compliance burden. This will require them to take the prior approval from the government of India. Hence, they continue to remain smaller rather than grow bigger. So the labor laws have created adverse incentives for the small scale industries to remain smaller rather than incentivizing them to grow bigger, create more employment opportunities, and contribute more to the Indian economy. Further, in order to avoid coming under the ambit of the labor laws, some of the industries in India have resorted to the employment of the contractual workers. So this particular growing trend of the industries to hire contractual workers rather than the permanent employees is referred to as the informalization of the workforce. Now, this is considered to be a problem because the industries do not provide for the job security to the contractual workers. They do not spend money on skilling of these contractual workers. So this in a way leads to the wastage of the human resources within the Indian economy. Nextly, the growing trade war accompanied by the increase in the labor costs in China is forcing some of the companies to move their production bases outside China. Now, most of these companies are moving either towards Vietnam or Bangladesh because of the adoption of the pro-labor policies by these countries. So the failure to bring about the labor reforms in India is reducing India's global competitiveness, and this in turn is a huge setback to both Make in India as well as Assemble in India. Nextly, as highlighted before, due to the complexity in the labor laws, most of the industries have continued to rely on hiring of contractual workers rather than the permanent employees, and these industries as such do not focus on skilling of these contractual workers. So the labor laws in a way have acted as an obstacle to the human capital formation. And lastly, we have to realize that most of these labor laws are quite outdated in nature and they do not address the emerging needs. For example, the labor laws in case of India have failed to recognize the gig workers. So unless you recognize the gig workers, you will not be able to provide various benefits to such workers. As far as who exactly are the gig workers and how the gig workers are different from the platform workers, we shall be discussing that part later on. Next, coming to the Code on Wages 2019 that was passed by the Parliament last year. Now, before discussing the provisions of the Code on Wages, we'll discuss as to what factors led to the introduction and passage of the Code on Wages. To do that, we'll understand the various problems with respect to the Minimum Wages Act 1948 that has now got replaced by the Code on Wages 2019. The basic idea behind this particular act was to ensure that the industries pay the minimum wages as stipulated by the government to their employees. Under this particular act, both the center as well as state, they were required to bring different forms of employment under the act. Accordingly, almost around 1,900 employment who were characterized as scheduled employment were covered under this particular act. But the problem with the Minimum Wages Act was that it did not automatically extend to the new forms of employment. Now, for example, let's say a particular person is employed in a petrol bunk. Now, unless the center or the state categorizes this particular employment as a scheduled employment under the Minimum Wages Act, the workers who are employed in the petrol bunk cannot be guaranteed with the minimum wages. So the center and the state, they were required to explicitly bring employment under the schedule of this particular act. So according to some of the estimates, this particular act did not cover almost up to 1/3 of India's workforce. Secondly, the Minimum Wages Act included workers in both the organized sector as well as certain categories of workers in the unorganized sector. Now, for example, some of the state government had decided to declare the domestic workers as the scheduled employment under this Minimum Wages Act. Accordingly, even the domestic workers in some of the states were also given the protection under this particular act. But the problem under this particular act was that it did not explicitly include vast majority of the workers who are presently working in the unorganized sector. Nextly, the wages fixed under this particular act was fixed based upon the subsistence level or the poverty level, which in turn led to the low level of minimum wages and hence did not lead to the increase in the disposable income of the workers. Nextly, under this particular act, the way the minimum wages were fixed in turn led to their variation across their employments within the states and across the states. And this not only led to the gender bias, but it also led to the wage disparities between the different forms of employment. Now, for example, the minimum wages used to vary across the employments. Usually, for example, the minimum wages for the security guards was higher than that of the domestic workers. Now, we all know that it is usually the men who are employed as security guards and it is usually the women who are employed as the domestic workers. So, this particular variation across the employments led to the gender bias. Secondly, there used to be a variation in the minimum wages within the states across multiple industries. For example, the minimum wages in the paper industries could be higher than the minimum wages in the brick industry. So this led to the wage disparity between the different forms of employment within a particular state only. Then there used to be variation in the minimum wages across the different states in a particular industry itself. Now, for example, in the paper industry, the minimum wages in the state of Maharashtra could be higher than the minimum wages for the paper industries in the state of Karnataka. So this in a way was a region-wise discrimination of the workers. To address this particular problem, now the Parliament has passed the Code on Wages 2019. Now this particular code seeks to replace 4 laws, that is the Payment of Wages Act, the Minimum Wages Act, the Payment of Bonus Act, Equal Remuneration Act and so on. Unlike the previous law, this law is applicable to all the workers irrespective of whether they are working in the organized sector or the unorganized sector. So now there is no need for the government to bring a particular employment as a scheduled employment. Automatically it covers all the employments both in the organized sector as well as the unorganized sector. Under this particular act, the center would fix the minimum wages for the centrally controlled establishments such as the railways, mines, oil fields, ports, etc. Whereas for all other establishments, the minimum wages would be fixed by the respective state government. Now, one of the most innovative concepts that has been introduced by the Code on Wages 2019 is the concept of the national level floor wage. Now, the national level floor wage to be fixed by the center would depend upon the standard of living and it would be different for the different geographical areas. So, once this national level floor wage is fixed by the center, either the center or the states cannot fix their minimum wages below the national level floor wage. Now, for example, let's say for the state of Karnataka, the national level floor wage is rupees 15,000. For the state of Maharashtra, the national level floor wage is rupees 12,000. So once this national level floor wage is fixed by the center, either the state government of Karnataka or that of Maharashtra, they cannot set their minimum wages below 15,000 in the state of Karnataka or below 12,000 in the state of Maharashtra. Further, unlike the Minimum Wages Act, wherein the minimum wages were fixed based upon the subsistence level, under this particular code, the minimum wages would be set taking into account the skill set of the worker and the difficulty of the work. So, greater the difficulty of the work, greater would be the minimum wages. This also includes the basic rate of the wages and the cost of living allowance. Now, this has basically been introduced in order to account for the increase in the cost of living which can happen over a period of time. More importantly, the Code of Wages 2019 also provides for the review of the minimum wages fixed by the center or the states every 5 years. In case of overtime, a worker is entitled to twice the normal wages. It also provides for the bonus, wherein under this particular act, the least amount of bonus could either be 8.33% of the wages or rupees 100, whichever is higher. It also sets up the advisory board in the form of the central advisory board and the state advisory board to advise the respective governments on various aspects related to the fixing of the minimum wages. Now coming to the Industrial Relations Code Bill. Now this particular bill basically seeks to replace three acts. These three acts are Industrial Disputes Act 1947, the Trade Union Act 1926, Industrial Employment Standing Orders 1946. As the name suggests, this particular bill basically seeks to provide for a harmonious relationship between employee and the employer through a number of mechanisms. For example, it provides for the recognition of the trade unions, it provides for the dispute resolution, it provides for various grounds and the manner in which the industry can terminate the employee and so on. Now you have to understand that this particular bill is still pending before the parliament. Accordingly, there is no need for you to go in depth regarding the various provisions of this particular bill. Rather, you have to focus upon those provisions that have led to the controversy or those provisions against which there is huge criticism and hence needs a relook. Accordingly, coming to first dimension, that is the applicability of the standing orders. Under the Industrial Employment Standing Orders 1946, industries are required to come out with the standing orders. Through such standing orders, industries are required to lay down various rules and regulations governing various aspects of work, such as the number of working hours, the fixation of the wages, the classification of the workers, the grounds on which the worker can be removed, and so on. Now, when the Industrial Relations Code Bill 2019 was introduced in the Parliament last year, this bill provided that the standing orders would be applicable to the establishments who are employing 100 or more workers. Now, in the newly introduced bill, introduced in the year 2020, now the threshold for the applicability of the standing orders has been increased from 100 to 300 workers. This means that the industries or the establishments that are employing less than 300 workers are not required to come out with the standing orders. This has basically been done in order to reduce the compliance burden on the small scale industries that are employing less than 300 people and hence boost the employment creation. However, this particular provision has been criticized on the fact that the standing orders would not be applicable to small scale industries who are employing less than 300 workers. So these small scale industries would no longer be required to lay down rules and regulations related to the number of working hours, fixation of wages, classification of the workers, the grounds on which the workers can be terminated, and so on. And hence this could lead to the exploitation of the workers in the hands of the industries. The next aspect is related to the closure of industries or the layoff of the workers. Now, as highlighted before, presently under the Industrial Disputes Act 1947, if an industry wants to fire any of its worker or if an industry wants to close down its business operations, then it would have to take the prior approval from the government. Now, presently the Industrial Disputes Act is applicable to the establishments that are employing more than 100 workers. Now, this particular threshold has now been increased to 300 under the newly introduced bill in the Parliament. This particular provision has basically been added in order to provide the necessary flexibility to the industries to hire and fire employees according to their needs and hence boost the employment creation. Moreover, the increase in the threshold from 100 workers to 300 workers would also enable the small scale industries that are presently employing less than 100 workers to employ at least up to 300 workers and hence transition to the medium scale level. However, this particular provision has been criticized on the account of the fact that this would lead to lack of job security for the number of workers who are working in the small scale industries. The next aspect is related to the carrying out of the strikes by the workers. Now, under the Industrial Relations Code Bill 2020, if the workers want to carry out any strikes against the management, then they are required to give at least 14 days prior notice. Now, once the notice is given, the workers of the trade union is required to approach the conciliation officer in order to press forward their demands. And if they are not happy with the order passed by the conciliation officer, then they can approach a separate tribunal which is proposed to be set up under this particular bill. Now, the Industrial Relations Code Bill has laid down a number of restrictions with respect to the strikes by the workers. For example, they have to give at least 14 days prior notice, and once the case is before either the conciliation officer or before the tribunal, then they are barred from carrying out the strikes. Now, this particular bar or the prohibition on carrying out strikes during the period of conciliation or the proceedings before the tribunal has been laid down in order to avoid the frequent lockouts in the industries and to ensure the smooth production cycle. However, this particular provision has been criticized on the grounds that this would reduce the bargaining power of the workers and gives more amount of powers in the hands of management. Nextly, under this particular bill, the government has been empowered to exempt certain industries from the application of this particular act in the matters of the public interest. This provision has been given to the government to give the necessary flexibility. However, this has been criticized in the account of the fact that exemption to be given to the industries would lead to the exploitation of the workers. The next aspect is related to the dispute related to the termination of the workers. Under this particular bill, once a worker is fired, then such a worker has a provision to make an application before the industrial tribunal. Ideally, whatever verdict is given by the tribunal, that should be considered as final. However, under this particular bill, government has been empowered to either modify or reject the award given by the industrial tribunal. However, it has been criticized on the grounds that this would violate the principle of the separation of powers, since here the government, that is the executive, is modifying or rejecting the award that is given by a quasi-judicial body. Now, coming to the Code on Social Security, as the name suggests, this particular bill seeks to provide for social security benefits in the form of provident fund, insurance, pension, maternity benefits to various categories of workers. This particular bill seeks to replace almost 9 laws related to the social security, such as the Employee Provident Fund Act 1952, the Maternity Benefit Act 1961, the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008, and so on. Now, presently in case of India, the industries that employ workers above a certain threshold level are required to make contribution towards various social security schemes such as the Employee Provident Fund, insurance, and so on. Similarly, the contribution to these social security schemes has been made mandatory for the workers who earn above certain monthly wages. Now, for example, under the Employee Provident Fund, both the employee as well as worker, they are required to contribute 12% towards the Employee Provident Fund. However, this has been made mandatory only for those companies or establishments that employ 20 or more workers. Further, it has been made mandatory only for those workers who earn monthly wages of below rupees 15,000. So if a particular worker is earning above 15,000, then it is up to him whether he would want to subscribe to the EPF or not. Now, this particular threshold level on the size of the industry as well as the income of an employee has been enshrined in the Act itself, as seen in the Employee Provident Fund. Now, under the Code on Social Security, now the government would be notifying the size of the industry as well as the income of the employee for which the code would be made applicable. So, what was earlier fixed under the law itself, now it would be fixed by the Government of India through the notification. See, whenever the Parliament of India makes a law, the Parliament decides only on the broad parameters of the law, whereas the minute or the detailed aspects of the law are required to be laid down by the government through various rules and regulations. This aspect is referred to as a delegated legislation. See, the delegated legislation is extremely important in order to provide the necessary freedom to the government to make various changes with respect to the rules and regulations. Just imagine if there is no delegated legislation, then for each and every change to be made in the act, we would have to take the approval of the parliament, which can make the law inflexible. So delegated legislation as such is quite important in a democratic country such as India. But at the same time, excessive delegated legislation can weaken the power and the authority of the Parliament of India. Now, a number of critics have pointed out that under the new code, now the Government of India can notify about the applicability of the Social Security. So, this is a case of excessive delegated legislation and hence can weaken the role of Parliament in ensuring the labor welfare for the various categories of workers. Nextly, the National Commission on Labour had clearly argued in the favor of the universal social security, wherein, according to this particular commission, all the industries, irrespective of the number of employees which they are employing, they should be required to contribute to the various social security benefits. However, as we can see in the newly introduced code, this would be made applicable only to those industries who employ workers above a certain threshold level. Hence, the industries that employ workers below the threshold level, they would not be required to contribute to social security benefits, and hence this would go against the idea of the universal social security put forward by the National Commission on Labour. This will also lead to the exclusion of the informal workers who are employed in the small scale industries from various social security benefits. This would also lead to the differential treatment of the employees within the same industry based upon the wages. Now, for example, once the government sets the applicability depending upon the income of an employee, all those employees who are earning below a threshold level, they would be required to mandatorily contribute towards the social security benefits. However, the employees who are earning above threshold level, they would not be required to contribute to social security benefits. So this in a way would lead to differential treatment of the employees. Nextly, one of the good aspects of the Code on Social Security is its expanded coverage, wherein it seeks to set up a social security fund for the benefit of not only the unorganized workers but also for the benefit of the gig workers as well as the platform workers. Now, the gig workers are basically those workers who are hired on a non-permanent and contractual basis by the organization for a limited time duration. The gig workers can range from the highly skilled IT professionals to low skilled workers such as the cab drivers. Similar to the concept of gig workers, we have the platform workers. Now, the platform workers are basically the workers who are engaged with a particular establishment through an online platform, and these workers are paid by the organization for the services rendered by them. So, we can consider the example of the Ola cab driver or the Uber cab drivers who use the online platform to have a partnership with the company as the platform workers. Now, even though this particular bill seeks to provide for a social security fund for all of these categories of workers, it also seeks to set up a national social security board to recommend schemes for their welfare. This particular provision has been criticized on the account of the fact that there is lack of clarity in the definition of the unorganized worker, gig worker or the platform worker. Now, for example, consider the case of a Ola or a Uber driver. Now, this Ola or a Uber driver can be considered as an unorganized worker, he can be considered as a gig worker, he can also be considered as a platform worker. Nextly, this particular bill provides that all the unorganized workers, gig workers and platform workers, if they have to avail the social security benefits, then they would be required to provide their Aadhaar card. Now, this particular provision is in clear violation of the Supreme Court judgment in the Puttaswamy's case. This is so because in this particular judgment, the Supreme Court had clearly highlighted that Aadhaar should be made mandatory only for those expenditure that is incurred from the Consolidated Fund of India. That is, if the government is incurring expenditure on a subsidy, benefit or a service which has been provided through the Consolidated Fund of India, only then the government can make Aadhaar mandatory. So here the government is providing the various social security benefit, but this is not provided from the Consolidated Fund of India. In spite of this, the government has made Aadhaar mandatory. Accordingly, this is in violation of the Supreme Court judgment in the Puttaswamy case. Now, coming to the last bill, that is the Code on Occupational Safety, Health and Working Condition. Now, this particular bill seeks to replace almost around 13 laws related to the safety, health and working conditions of the labor. Some of these laws are the Factories Act 1948, the Mines Act 1952, the Contractual Labor Act 1970, the Interstate Migrant Workers Act, and so on. Now, this particular bill basically provides that this would be applicable to all the factories that are employing more than 20 workers if it is using electricity, and in case if it is not using electricity and if it is employing more than 40 workers, then this act would be made applicable. Now, this particular provision of the bill has been criticized on the grounds that the safety standards as such should be made applicable to all the industries irrespective of the size. If you remove the small scale industries from the ambit of this particular act, then this could possibly lead to a compromise on the safety standards of the workers, and hence this goes against the interests of the workers. Nextly, the bill also provides that the government of India or the state government can provide for an exemption to any establishment from the provisions of this particular act in order to boost employment creation and the economic activity. However, this provision has been criticized on the grounds that this provides for a higher discretionary powers to the government. Apart from that, if you look at the present Factories Act 1948, this also provides for an exemption. However, the exemption can be given only in the cases of the public emergency as seen during the recent COVID-19, and this exemption is applicable only for a limited time duration of 3 months. However, this particular bill provides for a very broad-based exemption on account of need to create employment or to boost the economic activity. Moreover, there is no time duration for which an establishment can be exempted from following the provisions of this particular act. Nextly, the recent lockdown imposed due to COVID-19 has exposed the vulnerabilities faced by the interstate migrant workers. Accordingly, this particular bill has provided for a number of benefits. For example, the interstate migrant workers can exercise an option to avail the PDS either in their native state or in whichever state they are being employed. They would also be provided with the insurance and the provident fund benefits. Then states have been asked to create a database of all the interstate migrant workers. However, to ensure the success of these provisions, we need to have the faster implementation of the One Nation, One Ration card. Further, we also need proper coordination between the center and states to create the database and to provide the social security benefits such as the insurance and provident fund to the interstate migrant workers. So because of these concerns raised with the introduction of the 3 labor codes, concerns have been raised that even though there is a need for the dilution of the labor laws, but the dilution of the labor laws have to take place after a much wider scrutiny and public discussion. The response to the questions that were posed before the start of the discussion has been provided in front of your screen. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now, the next article also appears on page number 1. Now, presently, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs declares the minimum support price for almost around 22 major agricultural commodities. To this particular list, if you add the sugarcane, for which the fair and remunerative prices is fixed, the Government of India provides for the price support for around 23 major agricultural commodities. Now, this particular article here highlights that the Union Cabinet has recently decided to increase the minimum support price for at least 6 major crops, out of which in case of wheat, the minimum support price has increased by almost around 2.6%. Now, this particular topic of minimum support price is quite important both from the perspective of prelims as well as the mains examination. In our DNS dated 24th of October 2019, I had covered in much greater detail about the various aspects of MSP, including its criticism as well as the newly launched government initiative known as PM Asha. So what I would do here is I would attach the previous DNS video for your revision. Every year before the sowing seasons, that is the Kharif and Rabi season, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs declares the minimum support price based upon the recommendations of the Commission on Agriculture Costs and Prices. Through the declaration of minimum support price, the Government of India basically assures the farmers as to what would be the minimum prices which they would get for their agricultural commodities. Hence, by assuring certain minimum prices on the agricultural commodities, the Government of India seeks to incentivize the farmers to invest in the agriculture. Apart from that, it also seeks to prevent the distressed sale of the agricultural commodities by the farmers. Now, as to how the minimum support price is actually fixed, the different approaches may be used in order to fix the minimum support price. These approaches are the A2 method, the second approach is A2 plus FL method, and the last method is the C2 method. Now, both these methods as such take into account the overall production cost that is involved in the agricultural sector. However, these approaches differ in terms of the coverage of these production costs, wherein if you look at the A2 method, we take into account all the inputs for which the farmers have paid the prices. Now, some of these inputs may include seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, labor, etc. When it comes to A2 plus FL method, it takes into account all the inputs which have been paid by the farmers, that is seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, labor. Apart from that, it also takes into account the implied cost of the family labor. That is, it takes into account the economic cost of the family labor in order to calculate the minimum support price. The last method is known as the C2 method. The C2 method as such is much more comprehensive than the A2 plus FL method, wherein apart from taking into account the expenditure incurred by the farmers on the payment of various inputs as well as the implied cost of the family labor, it also takes into account all other implied costs. Now, some of these implied costs may include the cost of the rent of the land. So if you look at these three different approaches, it is being said that the C2 method as such is the most comprehensive method that can be adopted in order to fix the minimum support price. However, presently the government of India has decided to fix the MSP based upon the A2 plus FL method, and the government has stated that the MSP as such should be at least 1.5 times the production cost that will be calculated according to the A2 plus FL method. Now, with respect to commodities that are covered under the minimum support price, presently the Commission on Agriculture Costs and Prices recommends the MSP for almost around 23 crops. Now, these crops are categorized into cereals, pulses, oilseeds and 4 commercial crops. And these 4 commercial crops are copra, sugarcane, cotton and raw jute. With respect to sugarcane, the government of India basically declares the FRP, which stands for the fair and remunerative prices. Now, this is a price that has to be paid by the sugarcane mill owners to the farmers on the procurement of the sugarcane. Now, in spite of the advantages associated with the declaration of the minimum support price, it has been stated that the agricultural pricing policy in India suffers from certain inherent flaws which not only affects the Indian agriculture but it also creates a distortions in the Indian economy. Now, these problems with the minimum support price have been highlighted by a critical evaluation which has been undertaken by the Niti Aayog. Apart from that, the problems with the MSP regime have also been highlighted by the Committee on Doubling of Farmers' Income, which is headed by Mr. Ashok Dalwai. Let us look at some of these problems associated with the agricultural pricing policy. The first problem is that normally there is a delay in the announcement of the minimum support price. Now, ideally, the minimum support price should have to be declared by the government of India before the sowing season so that the farmers can get to know as to what would be the minimum price that they would get on the cultivation of these agricultural commodities. However, since the government delays the announcement of the minimum support price, such a signal is not being sent to the farmers. Secondly, as discussed before, the minimum support price can be fixed through multiple methods. Now, if you look at the National Commission of Farmers, which was headed by MS Swaminathan, the MS Swaminathan committee had recommended that while fixing the minimum support price, we had to take into account the C2 approach, which is considered to be most comprehensive approach in order to fix the minimum support price. However, the government of India has decided to adopt the A2 plus FL approach in order to declare the minimum support price. That is why it is being stated that the amount of MSP that is declared by the government of India is considerably lower. The third problem with respect to minimum support price is that even though the MSP is declared for almost 23 crops, it is being stated that it is the procurement of only paddy as well as wheat that is more strong as compared to the other agricultural commodities. For instance, the procurement of the pulses and oilseeds is comparatively lower as compared to the procurement of the paddy and wheat, because of which it can be stated that the declaration of minimum support price is benefiting mainly those farmers who are cultivating paddy and wheat, and it has failed to benefit the farmers who are cultivating either the pulses or the oil seeds. The next problem was identified by the Shanta Kumar Committee on the Food Corporation of India reforms, that is the FCI reforms. Now, this particular committee has stated that only 6% of the farmers in India have been able to get benefited from the minimum support price, which goes on to show that it is only the large farmers who have got the benefit from the minimum support price. Hence, the small and marginal farmers, who constitute almost around 86% of the farming community in India, have failed to get benefited from the minimum support price. Nextly, as stated before, the minimum support price has basically promoted the cultivation of the paddy and wheat, which are considered to be more water consuming as compared to the other agricultural commodities. Hence, some of the critics have pointed out that the minimum support price has actually promoted the cultivation of the water intensive crops in the Indian agriculture. Presently, India is the largest importer of the pulses as well as the oil seeds. Hence, in order to reduce the imports of the pulses and oil seeds, the government of India should have declared higher amount of MSP, as well as it should have gone for higher amount of procurement of the pulses as well as the oil seeds. But since the MSP regime and the procurement regime with respect to pulses and oil seeds is comparatively poor as compared to the paddy and wheat, the government pricing policy has failed to reduce the import of the pulses and oil seeds into India. Ideally, the pricing policy of the government of India should have incentivized the farmers to produce more amount of pulses and oil seeds so as to reduce their imports. Now, keeping in mind the problems associated with the minimum support price, recently the government of India has decided to launch a new scheme known as Pradhan Mantri Annadata Sanrakshan Abhiyan, mainly for the benefit of the oilseed and pulses farmers. Now, under the PM Asha scheme, there are mainly three components. These components are the price support scheme, the price deficiency payment scheme, and the pilot of private procurement and the stockist scheme. Under the price support scheme, the government of India shall procure both pulses as well as oil seeds from the farmers so as to incentivize them to increase the production of the pulses and oil seeds. With respect to price deficiency payment scheme, this particular scheme would come into picture when the market prices of the oil seeds fall below a level which is lower than the minimum support price. Now, whenever the market price of the oil seeds fall below the minimum support price, under such circumstances, whatever is the difference amount, this difference amount shall be directly deposited by the government in the beneficiary account, that is the farmer's account. Now, for example, let's say the MSP for groundnut has been declared as rupees 200, whereas the market price of the groundnut has got reduced to around 160. So here the difference amount of rupees 40 shall be directly transferred by the government of India into the farmer's account. So the idea of price deficiency payment scheme is to compensate the farmers whenever the market price of the oil seeds fall below the minimum support price. And under the last component, the state governments have been given necessary amount of autonomy in order to rope in the private sector for the procurement of the oil seeds. Now, because of these three components, it is being stated that the Pradhan Mantri Annadata Sanrakshan Abhiyan would be able to bring about a transformation with respect to the government pricing policy. Now, based upon our video analysis, a main question for your practice here could be: the agriculture pricing policy suffers from certain inherent flaws and also creates distortion in the Indian economy. Discuss. Now, the next article appears on page number 6 and is titled as A Point of Order. This article shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection Indian polity. See, in the parliament, we have something known as the division of votes, which refers to the casting of votes by the members inside the parliament to decide on the passage of the important bills, resolutions, motions, etc. Usually, the casting of votes takes place to the voice vote, wherein the presiding officer of the house calls upon the members to declare their support by saying aye, and if they want to oppose, they can say no. So depending upon the voice vote, the presiding officer can then declare a particular motion to be either adopted or rejected. Usually either the presiding officer would say that the ayes have it and would say the motion has been adopted, or the presiding officer can say that the noes have it and accordingly he can declare a motion to be rejected. However, this particular decision of the presiding officer to declare a motion as being adopted or rejected merely through voice vote can be challenged by even a single member in the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha. So even if a single member challenges the decision of the presiding officer, then as per the rules, the presiding officer is required to go for the division of votes. That means the members as such would be required to cast their votes. And the casting of votes can take place through three different mechanisms. That is through the automatic vote recorder, which is placed on the seats of the individual members of the parliament, through the distribution of the paper slips among the members, or the members can go into the lobbies to register their votes. Now, since the introduction of the automatic vote recorder, the third method of the members going into the lobbies has become obsolete and has not been used. Now, this particular editorial has appeared in the newspaper because recently during the discussion on the passage of the two controversial farm bills, the opposition party MPs had actually challenged the decision of the presiding officer to go according to the voice vote. The opposition party MPs had called in for the division of votes, wherein they had asked that they need to cast their votes to decide whether they want to pass this particular bill or not. Now, as per the procedure, the presiding officer here should have called for the division of votes, wherein he should have taken the votes of the members either through the automatic vote recorder or the distribution of the slips among the members. However, the deputy chairman of the Rajya Sabha, who was then the presiding officer, decided not to go for the division of votes since the members as such had turned unruly and the house as such was not in order. In this regard, the concept of point of order, which is a device used in the parliamentary proceedings, becomes quite important for the prelims examination. See, the point of order can be raised by the member of the house when the rules of the procedure are not correctly followed. So in this particular case, the rule says that even if a single member challenges the decision of the presiding officer to go according to voice vote, the presiding officer should go for the division of votes. However, this particular procedure as such was not followed. Accordingly, in such cases, the point of order can be raised by the member of the house. Usually, the point of order is raised by the opposition party MPs in order to corner the governments on important issues. The condition required for raising the point of order is that usually the point of order should relate to the interpretation of the rules governing the procedure of the house. It can also be related to the various articles of the constitution governing the procedure of the house. So if a particular member believes that an article of the constitution that deals with the adoption of a bill in the parliament is not being correctly followed, then he can raise the point of order. Apart from that, while raising the point of order, MP should also keep in mind that the question that he is raising should remain within the cognizance of the presiding officer. So these are some of the important aspects which you should know with respect to this particular article. Now the next article appears on page number 9. This article highlights that the Parliament has recently passed the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Second Amendment Bill. This article shall be important both from the perspective of Indian polity as well as Indian economy. The COVID-19 has made it difficult for the MSMEs to repay the loans which they have taken from the banks. There are genuine fears that if the MSMEs default on their loan repayment, then such MSMEs would come under the ambit of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Insolvency resolution can be initiated against such MSMEs, and the owners could lose their control over their existing MSMEs. Hence, in order to provide the relief to the MSMEs who have been affected by the COVID-19, the President had earlier approved an ordinance. Now, as per this particular ordinance, if an MSME defaults for a period of 6 months between March 25th to September 25th, then in cases of such kind of default, no insolvency resolution can be initiated against such MSMEs. Now, in order to give effect to such an ordinance, the government had earlier introduced the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Second Amendment Bill, and as the article here highlights, this particular bill has now been passed by the Indian Parliament. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is considered to be a landmark act to deal with the growing NPAs of the Indian banks, and accordingly, this IBC becomes important for your prelims examination. So from the perspective of the prelims examination, let us understand the working of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Now earlier, in order to deal with the recovery of bad loans, we used to have multiple laws such as the SARFAESI Act, debt recovery tribunals, etc. So the multiplicity in the recovery of the bad loans was leading to the undue delay. Hence, in order to address this particular problem, these laws have been consolidated and amalgamated into a single law known as the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. This code provides for the recovery of bad loans both from the companies as well as individuals. Now, this would be applicable if a particular company defaults on a loan amount of a value greater than 1 crore and if an individual defaults on a loan amount of a value greater than rupees 1000. So the threshold for invoking the IBC for a company is rupees 1 crore and for the individuals it is rupees 1000. Now this is important because earlier the threshold for invoking the IBC for a company was rupees 1 lakh, but recently in the month of March this threshold has been increased from rupees 1 lakh to 1 crore for the benefit of the MSMEs. So under this particular code, whenever there is a default either by a company or an individual, then the insolvency resolution process gets initiated. This process can be initiated either by the borrower or the lender. So it is not necessary that only the bank has to initiate the insolvency resolution. So even a company or an individual who defaults on the repayment can also initiate the insolvency resolution process. Subsequent to the initiation of the process, the adjudicating authority is appointed, wherein in case of company, the adjudicating authority happens to be the National Company Law Tribunal, and for the individuals it is the Debt Recovery Tribunals. Subsequently, the adjudicating authority then appoints the insolvency professional. The insolvency professionals are basically those professionals who would be entrusted with the responsibility of managing the assets of the companies when the company comes under the insolvency resolution. Subsequent to this, a committee of creditors is appointed. Now, usually in case of India, a particular company, let's say A, it may have borrowed money from 3 different banks X, Y, Z. So when this particular company A defaults, all of these 3 banks X, Y, Z come together and they set up a committee of creditors. Now this is important because a related question on the committee of creditors has already been asked in the prelims 2019. Now this committee of creditors is then required to come up with a resolution plan within the next 330 days. Earlier, the timeline for coming up with a resolution plan was rupees 270 days, but now it has been increased to 330 days. So as part of the resolution plan, here the committee of creditors may go for the restructuring of loans. So here the restructuring of loans means here the committee of creditors may decide to reduce the principal amount, they may decide to reduce the interest amount, or they may decide to extend the maturity period of the loan in order to make it easier for the borrowers to repay back the previous loan. Such a resolution plan of the committee of creditors has to be approved by 66% of the votes. Now when we say 66% of the votes, it is not in terms of number, but it is in terms of the value of the loan amount given by the different banks. Now let's say in this particular case, the company A has borrowed rupees 100 from the 3 banks XYZ, wherein the bank A has given rupees 50, bank Y has given rupees 20, and the bank Z has given rupees 30. So in this particular case, if banks X and Y, who constitute 70% of the loans given to company A, come together and approve the resolution plan, then such a resolution plan is considered as being accepted, even though the bank Z here may reject the resolution plan. Similarly, in this particular case, bank Y and Z, they cannot come together and approve the resolution plan because they would constitute only 50% of the votes. Please do note that earlier the threshold for approving the resolution plan was 75% of the votes, but later on through an IBC amendment, this threshold has been reduced to 66% of the votes. But the question is, what if the committee of creditors fail to come up with a resolution plan within the 330 days, or if the resolution plan is not approved by the committee of creditors, then the only option then would be the company would go for the liquidation. Liquidation here means whatever assets the company has, these assets would be sold off. The money recovered as such would then be distributed among the different banks which had lent money to the company. So these are some of the important aspects which you should know with respect to the working of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. This article appears on page number 13. Recently this year, almost around 330 elephants had died in the country of Botswana. The officials believe that these elephants may have died due to the consumption of the water that is contaminated with the toxins produced by a form of bacteria known as the cyanobacteria. Apart from that, the officials have also tried to link the increase in the cyanobacteria with the climate change. Cyanobacteria are a form of bacteria which can occur naturally in standing water, and sometimes they can grow into large blooms which is referred to as the blue-green algae. Not all the species of cyanobacteria produce the toxins, but those species of cyanobacteria that produce the toxins, they can affect both animals as well as human beings. The scientists have tried to link the cyanobacteria with the climate change, wherein the scientists believe that the increase in the temperature due to the climate change will further aid the growth of bacteria, leading to the increase in the growth of the algal blooms in seas as well as oceans. And if this happens, this could have an adverse impact on the health of both animals as well as human beings. See, just like how the cyanobacteria has been in the news with respect to the death of the 300 elephants in Botswana, even the canine distemper virus was in news in India with respect to death of more than 20 lions in the Gir forest. So the canine distemper is basically a contagious and serious disease that attacks the respiratory, gastrointestinal and the nervous system of various canines. It basically affects dogs and puppies, but in some cases it can affect even the wild canines as such as foxes, wolves, lions, tigers, etc. It is basically caused by a single-stranded RNA virus of the family Paramyxoviridae. The transmission of this particular virus can take place either through inhalation or with a shared food. See, as far as the death of the lions in Gir forest is concerned, this was attributed to the sharing of the food consumed by the lions with the dogs. Usually the lions do not consume their entire prey at one go. In between, the dogs can consume the kill and infect the kill with the canine distemper virus. So once the lion comes back to finish off its prey, the lion can get infected with such a virus. Please do note that this particular virus does not affect the humans, but the human beings as such can act as carriers of this virus. Now the next article appears on page number 6 in the form of an editorial and is titled as In the Air. This particular article highlights that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention has recently acknowledged the spread of the novel coronavirus through the aerosols. Now the various aspects of the aerosol transmission of the COVID-19 has been covered by me in the DNS dated 12th of July 2020. In this particular DNS, we had discussed about the various transmission modes of the COVID-19, and with respect to the aerosol transmission, we had discussed as to what is the current debate over the aerosol transmission and what are the implications of the aerosol transmission. So I would suggest you to go through this particular DNS dated 12th of July 2020 to have an understanding about the aerosol transmission of the COVID-19. Now the next article appears as a lead article on page number 6 and is titled as Interpreting the India-China Conversations. This article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of signing of 5-point action plan between India and China. Accordingly, this article highlights various concerns and challenges with respect to the 5-point action plan and accordingly discusses as to what should be the India's strategy to deal with China going forward. Now the various aspects of this particular article has already been covered by me in the DNS dated 12th of September 2020. So before reading this particular article on your own, I would suggest you to go through this particular DNS dated 12th of September 2020. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day.